Hello, you're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of April 25, 2025. A tremendous number of critical events have occurred today, so let's get started. Well, let's go in order. If we talk about the Sumy direction, combat operations here are ongoing constantly. The Russian army has set clear objectives. The main goal is to clear the territory of Kursk Oblast by the May holidays. Therefore, the Russian army is not slowing its offensive pace here. Fighting is taking place for the settlement of Oleshnya, and a large number of objective control footage has been published. I'll remind you that a few days ago, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported the complete clearing of Oleshnya, though without any objective control footage to confirm this information. But today, the first clips have appeared online, published by the Ukrainian Armed Forces 95th Brigade, showing a large amount of equipment that attempted to storm Oleshnya. Some of the footage was recorded on the northeastern outskirts. So, while there may not yet be complete footage confirming full control over the village, there is already evidence confirming the presence of Russian soldiers. It's possible that fighting is now ongoing for the southwestern outskirts, or the outskirts in general. But despite the Russian Defense Ministry's report, there is a chance that Ukrainian soldiers are still present in parts of the settlement. Next, fighting is also taking place for the settlement of Gornal. Objective control footage was published today by the Russian side. In this video, we can see combat in the village, with Russian units under the command of Russian army officers entering the settlement. Several episodes were geolocated, one here, another there, so the geolocation indicates that Russian units are only approaching Gornal. However, by midday, some pro-Russian sources noted that the Russian armed forces had managed to clear at least 75%, if not 80% of Gornal. By the end of April 25th, the Ukrainian armed forces are clinging to the northwestern outskirts, staying as close as possible to the state border to retreat into Sumy Oblast at the right moment and move into the next large forested area toward the settlement of Magritsia. There is a very high probability that the Russian armed forces will fully clear this settlement by tomorrow. At the same time, the Russian army is intensively striking the settlement of Myropolia. For the third or fourth day in a row, the settlement has been under massive bombardment, suggesting that the Russian army may be preparing to launch an offensive in this direction to advance into Sumy Oblast and create a security zone. Something Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly mentioned since the start of the special military operation. The intensity is very high, but it seems this will happen at least after the departure of unclear reference, possibly Utkov. Next, we move to the Kupiansk sector of the front. It's relatively quiet here, with no high activity. The only somewhat active zone is the Lyman direction, where the main fighting is centered on the settlement of Redkudub. It appears that Ukrainian units have more or less stabilized the front line here. They clearly understand the importance of Redkudub in the battle for Borova and in the third battle for Lyman. That's why reserves were deployed here, which has somewhat slowed the Russian offensive. At the moment, we can see that Russia is gradually leveling Redkudub with airstrikes to prepare a foothold for further advances, which will likely resume or begin within a few days. Next, we move to the Chasiv Yar Toretsk Kostiantynivka sector. As usual these days, a huge number of geolocations are coming in. Russia is striking with FAB bombs. A large number of FAB hits have been recorded along the entire line of contact over the past day. Regarding adjustments, today several pro-Russian cartographers reported that the Russian armed forces have completely cleared the northwestern outskirts of Chasiv Yar, specifically the Zakidne and Novosevernye districts. According to some pro-Russian sources, this area is now under Russian control. Additionally, based on incoming geolocations, the Russian army is increasing the intensity of combat operations and strikes on the central part of Chasiv Yar, where scattered elements of Ukraine's 24th Mechanized Brigade still remain. Given that the western and northwestern parts of Chasiv Yar are already under firm Russian control, there is a very high likelihood that Russia will soon ramp up its offensive pressure on the central districts to push out Ukrainian units. It also appears that the Russian military command on this front has set the task of clearing at least the central part of Chasiv Yar before the May holidays. Next, we move to the Kleban Beak sector of the front. Today there are again many adjustments, and once again, some neutral cartographers and neutral experts claim that the Ukrainian armed forces have conducted a series of counterattacks over the past few days, allowing Ukrainian units to re-enter the Zabalka district, the southern quarter of the town of Toretsk, as well as the northwestern part of the settlement. At the same time, geolocated footage and objective control videos confirm the advance of the Russian army from north of Toretsk toward the reservoirs and the railway line. In other words, as we previously discussed, the advance is following the railway from the settlement of Dakhna, bypassing Yuzhna Delivka, and then moving northwest towards settlements like Oleksandra Shultina. Regarding the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces between the Siversky Donets-Donbass Canal, Kostiantynivka, and the Kleban-Byk Reservoir, Russian artillery and FPV drones remain highly active as usual. Today, a large batch of footage was published showing the destruction of Ukrainian positions and the hunting of Ukrainian Baba Yaga-type drones. Next, we move to the Kleban-Byk direction itself. Footage of Russian artillery operations has been published. The Russian side is gradually continuing its offensive, but it is clear that the pace of the advance has slowed significantly compared to what we observed a few days or weeks ago. This is likely due to the fact that Russian forces are approaching the next line of Ukrainian defenses. According to numerous cartographers, both pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian and neutral, the Russian armed forces have reached and likely entered the southern outskirts of the settlement of Stara Mykolaiivka. Pro-Russian sources report that Russian troops have entered the first buildings and taken control of them. Pro-Ukrainian sources, however, describe the entire area from the settlement of Kaline to Stara Mykolaiivka as a grey zone. It seems they already had some information suggesting that the first Russian units had entered Stara Mykolaiivka, but there is not yet enough evidence to confirm their consolidation. Combat is ongoing for Stara Mykolaiivka, a key settlement. Its fall would lead to a partial collapse of the front from the settlements of Tarasivka, Zeleny Pole, Hanatovka, and Stara Mykolaiivka eastward to Sukha Balka and further toward Lenidovka. Essentially, an entire pocket would be cut off, and the front line would automatically shift to the Alexandropol-Zarya-Romanivka line. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk sector of the front. Here, as usual, the Russian army is gradually trying to push through Ukrainian defenses toward Novopavlivka. No changes have been reported in the Pokrovsk area, quiet, likely due to both sides regrouping. Regarding the Novopavlivka direction, today, according to several reliable pro-Russian sources, the Russian armed forces launched an offensive from the settlement of Nadiivka toward Novoalexandrivka. I'll remind you that over the past 3 months, there have been multiple reports of Russian forces even entering Novoalexandrivka, but in previous attempts, they failed to consolidate their positions. This time, however, they may succeed. I'll also remind you that the Russian army is gradually trying to reduce the distance to the administrative border of Donetsk Oblast. There are also rumors that reaching Dnipropetrovsk Oblast is one of the tasks set for the Russian army by the May holidays. As for the Bohdanivka direction, fighting continues for the settlement itself, but as you can see, there have been no advances so far. Combat is taking place on the southeastern outskirts without significant frontline adjustments. It appears that Ukraine has managed to bring in enough manpower and equipment to maintain control over the situation for now. That's all for today, dear friends. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.